Hey, fellow G and Ters, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. So we're doing this is 2025, our first 2025 recording, Daniel.
Booyah.
And we want it to be the year of talking about karma mudra, using sexuality, intimacy, love, and passion and desire in the spiritual path. That's the goal. That's how we ended up 2024 talking about. And we just said, what the hey, 2025, just going to continue the same shit.
That's right. We are
So,
we are in it. And we're going even deeper.
yes,
Oh,
deeper and
wait a minute.
deeper.
That was a interesting choice of
There's
words.
certain sauciness to every word now. It takes
Every
on
word
many
now.
layers of meaning, just the way it
That's
is in the
right.
tantras.
Yes,
They say that every word has multiple layers of meaning.
correct.
Um, Also, kind of the thing that we want to do, we have our GNT retreat coming up. That's supposed to be kind of an introduction to Tantra. So it
Yes.
fits into what we're trying to do in March. So people who are interested in that, I guess we can legitimately say seats are filling up fast.
See, yeah,
Occupation possibilities are ending. So yeah,
correct. However, we will be, based
people.
on kind of an idea that was given to me by a listener. So thank you, sir, because you know who you are. We will be offering it online. So
Mhm.
for interested people, we'll make it available. All the sessions will be made available online simultaneously. So not only will you have access to it live, but then you will also have access to the recordings. So thanks for the good idea to our special listener. And for anybody who's interested, obviously, if you know us personally, hit us up. We'll give you the information, the signups, and all this. But otherwise, feel free to leave a message on the YouTube videos if you're watching it on YouTube. If you're listening to it, you can email us at ginandtantra@gmail.com, or feel free to slide in our DMs at the Gin and Tantra podcast on Instagram. So any one of those ways you want to get a hold of us, we'll loop you in, and you can join at your leisure.
Yeah. And we have like the idea of just sort of helping people get the ball rolling in terms of these tantric things, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. All right. On that note, we're going to do this little bit of episodes that we got going on, this one and maybe a couple coming up on attachment theory, kind of the Eastern and the Western side of this. I think it's always kind of fun that's one of the things we try to do that maybe is a little unique is to kind of mix in some of the Western psychological stuff in with the Eastern
Yeah.
tantric stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Um, it fits kind of our background as being clinicians too, you know? So some of the Chinese medicine things we do and some of the other clinical stuff we do. So we ran a little bit on attachment theory, which is, kind of a big deal psychological theory. But before we do that, we're going to do the preliminary for it, which is a little bit more of the Eastern take of how to think about attachment from different points of view. And it's so relevant because you're not going to be able to do any of these practices unless you somehow address attachment, right? One way or the
Correct.
other. How you
Correct.
feel about that internally within yourself, if you're doing just the meditative aspect or if you're working with a partner, obviously attachment and how you feel about attachment with people is going to play in that too. So, seemed like a good idea, so we're rolling with it.
Definitely.
All right. Daniel was like hitting the books on it. I'm hitting the books on it.
Yeah, we are
Yeah.
studying. It's legit. I mean, we're always reading things, but right now I
Yeah.
think this is probably the first time that we have been multiple books deep on a subject like this.
Mhm.
We've done single books before, but this is multiple books over a long period on this
Yeah.
particular topic and related topics. So it's good.
And it's really funny because we spent a lot of time talking about other stuff before we really got to like the sexual yogas and the karma mudra. We wanted to like build up the whole thing, and now we're here.
I mean, but isn't
So
isn't
the
that a great
foreplay is over. That's it, you
right?
know?
The foreplay, but isn't that a great romance though? You kind of, you
Yeah, the slow build.
you spend some time getting to know who you're working with and how they think, and then yeah, then you get to know how
Makes
they.
makes it a smoother ride.
That's
Yeah.
right.
All right. So Eastern side of attachment, right? And I
Yeah.
wanted to do this a little bit based on, one of the people we've been trying to share, Dr. Nita, great doctor, tantric practitioner. So we've been kind of trying to use him as a little bit of a conversation starter. That's a typical thing to do in the tantric world, right? In the Buddhist world, you take something as sort of a conversation starter source text and you sort of comment. So I wanted to like kind of share a little bit here. And I'm really interested in your thoughts, Daniel, because we'll look at how they think about attachment in sort of the sutric Buddhist tradition, and we'll talk about what that is in a little bit, and the more tantric side of things. But I had like a general question in mind, which is like, maybe we'll think about it as we go through it and then like double back it on the end. But like, what do people in the West think about Buddhism or spirituality and attachment just in general? And I have to admit, like for me in writing my side of these notes up, I was like, I don't know what people think about this, but I do get some idea that people think about spirituality being like non-attachment. I think that sort of has disseminated through American culture on some level. Do you sort of agree with that?
I agree. Yeah, yeah. Spirituality or
Yeah, spirituality, Buddhist stuff. There's a kind of a non-attachment vibe that,
so I would say, yeah, this could be an entire episode right here. Um,
yeah.
but okay, so Buddhism, I don't think that there is any, it's a religion. It's
Hmm.
not, I don't believe that it's viewed as a practice. I believe it's viewed as a religion. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, just because that's the case doesn't mean that people don't take things from Buddhism that they like. Okay. Just like they would from other traditions. But I think Buddhism seems to be, well, doesn't seem to be, it is non-Judeo-Christian, thereby it's far enough away that you could pull things from it without really upsetting the apple cart from anybody in your family. Oh, I heard this Buddhist guy, this monk talk, and no one's going to be like, oh, those rotten, whatever. They're like, I don't know anything about it, and he's a monk, so he's probably like a priest or something. And what did he say? Oh, we should be compassionate. Okay, that's cool. So that's
Hmm.
that's Buddhism. That's what people think of Buddhism. Other words that are important, I think, in terms of the language of today is the mindfulness. I think people will associate that with Buddhism or Zen, but they don't really understand what Zen is. They just think of like things that are clean, and like simple. Like that's very Zen. I want to be very Zen. Like, okay.
Simplicity maybe or something like
Yeah, there
that.
you go.
Yeah, yeah.
Simplicity, right?
Simplicity. Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
So this thing of mindfulness, I think they associate with that. But then in terms of spirituality, I think that there's a couple ideas of spirituality, and I'll hear what you want to think. And audience, please, hit us up because these are deep kind of ideas because I think you and I, Eric, and actually many people would identify themselves as spiritual. They may not say I'm a Christian or I'm a Catholic or I'm a agnostic or Jewish or whatever. They would probably say they're spiritual, which means that they believe, in my opinion, of something that goes beyond the ordinary, but maybe not quite sure what that might be. And that's the
Hmm.
spiritual vibe. Okay, that's the spiritual vibe on one sense. On the other sense, spiritual also, I believe, means to be holy, means to be an ascetic, means to be, and for those who don't know, that term means like monk-like.
Hmm. A renunciate, you might
A
say, or something like
renunciate.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. Exactly. So,
Hmm.
I mean, I was visiting California this past week over New Year's, friends, family, things like this. And, we're out doing our thing. And someone was at, I was talking about this kind of tantric stuff that we have been going into, that I've been reading about, books that you've shared with me and, that I've read on my own. And she was like, man, this seems like she's like typical guy, just talking about sex all the time. I was like, oh man, it's not, it's literally, and she's
Yeah.
like, I thought you were spiritual. And I was like, oh, this is it right here. But like that moment brought up for me the divide
Hmm.
between what is viewed externally as quote unquote spiritual and the practice of something that is spiritual. And so I had to tell her, I was like, spirituality doesn't have a dogma associated with it. So you can be spiritual and still do different things. So for example, and Eric, you know this, but we'll educate the audience a little bit, that there are tantric practices in which the monks who attain high levels of meditation are encouraged to go into the world of the mundane people and get drunk, hook up with women,
Potentially. Hmm.
take drugs. Like it that is not, that is part of the practice. But on the outside, we would go, wait a minute, I thought they were spiritual. And you're like, what do you mean by spiritual? If you mean by renunciate, you don't have to be spiritual to be a renunciate, you know? Those are called
Yeah.
incels.
They're not going to be like the spiritual guy on 4chan just bitching about everything.
Right, that's it.
Um, yeah, I mean, part of it has to do with like questions of like purity too,
Yeah,
you
oh, for
know,
sure. Yeah.
and the idea that like even like the reaction of your family member or friend, I'm not sure who it was, but oh,
Yeah.
you're just being a bro and you want to talk about sex and you're trying to mix it in with
Yes.
your quote unquote spirituality or something. But yeah, we come up in some other episodes too, but the whole idea is like, yeah, you everything is pure at the ground level, even those things that you wouldn't think of when you get to the core of what they are,
Hmm.
so you kind of push that boundary of what constitutes purity. And it
Hmm.
happens in a lot of old tantras, sometimes it's people doing mundane work, like a famous story of one of the tantric masters who was just like squeezing the sesame seed oils out of the seeds, just doing mundane work,
Yeah.
and, he was advised to do that so he could kind of do something that was a little bit humbling. He's working on his humility, but that's kind of like everyday shit, right?
Hmm.
And then some of the stuff is like, like the same character, he had to work as a doorman in the brothel or something, right?
Mm.
Just go around the world and have different experiences.
Yes.
And like, if you, I don't know what, I don't know what people would say that you're working as a doorman at the brothel. That's a spiritual practice, but yeah, that's what it is,
Yeah.
You're around the places where there's sexual energy and people in all kinds of heightened emotional states and what that's like.
Mm.
We did a crazy episode back in the day where we just talked about like, going to like a striptease bar in Chicago, right?
Yes.
I was a little nervous talking about it, but it was one of the pieces of advice. I never went to a strip club in my life, but I said, "Hey, Daniel, want to do this tantric exercise with me?" Daniel was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, that sounds good,"
Uh-huh.
and it was very interesting. So be in that kind of sexually charged
Yeah, we should
place.
do it again.
Yeah, not how many years has it been? That was very interesting, and the person that we met there was studying all this spiritual stuff. It was just sort of like one of those tantric events, one of the ladies there was really into studying like psychic powers, and she was in an institute in Chicago where they were studying those things, and she had all kinds of interest in spiritual stuff. And we just like basically like shot the shit for like 45 minutes or something.
Yeah.
That was the event. I wasn't totally comfortable when that episode came out because I was like, but since then we talked about so much crap, doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
exactly. Yeah. At that
Yeah,
point, that was just like,
that seems like mundane.
so Erica, let me ask, let me, because I feel like this episode is going to be a little bit shorter, but I like this question as
Yeah,
as a premise. What do you consider? So, okay, two-parter. What would you consider yourself if someone was going to ask you? And then and I'll do the same. What do you consider a spiritual life, or being a spiritual minded individual? Because I am beginning to not love that term. I am actively wanting to find a different term. Um, one that is also understood by many people, so it's a difficult task. But so let me hear yours, and then I'll do.
those are the craziest Daniel questions I've ever because they're impossible to answer. But I'm gonna give it a tumble.
Yeah,
They're asked in sincerity, obviously.
yeah,
So, okay. So, I mean, what constitutes a spiritual life? I think I wrestled with this in, different parts of my own personal story with this. I started like probably really thinking about this when I started studying Zen, which was in like my early to mid 20s. And I think like what that meant kind of like built over time for me. Now, I guess I'm comfortable considering myself something like a tantrika. I
okay,
would, I'm comfortable with that kind of, if you have to put like an answer to a question, how would you think of yourself?
yeah,
For me, though, I frame that pretty broad, where I would still consider the things that I learned from Zen to be part of that same story, and there's things that I feel like I really learned in doing that from that time in my life that was very important, that intense period of study. Or, I love certain aspects of like Rumi and, Sufi thought. And I would say those things kind of fit into my picture of what sort of constitutes my own spiritual life, right?
yeah,
And some Kabbalistic things I learned. And, so we had our old school intro, which was listing all of these things that we're into. And like that was kind of purposely chosen because those things I think have built up each of us in our own ways who we
yeah,
feel that we are, right?
yeah,
So some kind of combination of those things kind of like coming together alchemically popping, have become to me what I think the spiritual life kind of is. And I think, for me, I guess the goal has been to sort of write my own stages of the path. So there's this whole idea of the stages of the path in the Tibetan Buddhist world, and you kind of like trace how a person will kind of develop over time and the different
mm,
things they might study and realize. And I thought, I love that thing. I learned it from Gelik Rinpoche in Ann Arbor, the first person to really make me seriously learn that. Great Tibetan guru, and thank you, Rinpoche, so much. It's emotional. Because it was, he was such an important figure, like Lama Glenn, Glenn
Mhm.
Mullen, just,
Yeah.
people who are really core to who you are. Dalai Lama as well. But, so I was taking on that Tibetan thing, but I also have tried to like put my own things in there, So as an example, related to our subject matter, I was really moved a lot by how Rumi thinks about love and connection
Yeah.
and alchemy between people. So for me, that became part of my own personal Lamrim,
Yeah.
and like including those other things. So, I think that maybe that answers the question. Hopefully it does in part, right? And it's been really trying to take, I've had great experiences with great spiritual teachers. There's just no doubt that that's the case.
Yeah.
Zen people, Taoist people, Buddhist tantric people, and other spiritual teachers too. And I've tried to like kind of meld those together to be kind of the melting pot of my life, which I'm okay calling tantra, but recognizing that there's like lots of things in my tantra. Is that okay as an answer?
I mean, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think what I could, if I'm going to summarize a little bit, is that like, for you, you kind of identify, at this point, you would identify yourself as a tantric practitioner
Yeah.
and, and leading a spiritual existence. And in that spiritual existence or that spiritual life, it is it is encompassing of all of the teachings and teachers that you have had from various traditions that have led you to the path that you are on currently. And the path that you are on currently is also has arisen because of the experiences that and learnings and whatever that you have had up until this point from those various things. So this is a kind of like the peak of where you're at this particular point.
I think like I've been doing this Buddhist Tantra stuff for like 17 years now, give or take.
Yeah.
So I'm a decent way into it. But I was also studying things, before then, 14 years or something like that, whatever
Right.
it is. And I think what happened for me was what we try to talk about here, this like stages of the path thing became kind of like the through line through.
Yeah.
And then it was okay just to add the other things to see where they fit. Even like, we do a lot of psychology and like we're going to talk about attachment theory. And one of my goals in doing that to share with people, but also personally to figure out like, okay, where do I think this fits?
Hmm.
In an overall story of a spiritual life, mine, but
Yeah.
maybe things that can be applicable for other people too.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So what's your answer to it? You posed a
Okay.
kind of a deep question. Hmm.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I would say that how would I identify myself? This is tough because I regularly say I never call myself a shaman.
Uh,
And I don't, and I'm that word again, language is important, and I think that word is very charged. But in the sake of being spiritual, will do the opposite of what I say, and then I will say that I'm a shamanic practitioner. Okay, so that's one. But that again, that includes the tantric practice, I include all those things, right? So that's on one hand. And what constitutes for me a spiritual life is much like how you said, and it's interesting, we're going to say very similar things, but you labeled all of the pieces that you experienced as the summation of where you are now. And that's exactly what I was thinking about before I asked you that question, is that like leading a spiritual life at some point, like how you did, is intentionally or consciously weaving together all of the things that you've learned, whether it be related or unrelated to what we would call quote unquote spirituality, to your own learning of a larger outside of the mundane sense, and not necessarily to leave. I'm not building a rocket ship to leave the thing. I'm building my own sort of integrative machine that can then, assimilate, digest all of the pieces of life and which includes a spiritual life and put them as fodder for my own alchemical fire for transformation, ultimately for transcendence and enlightenment. But to take all of them and do that, this to me is the spiritual life. And that might not necessarily be within the, I'm not going to say confines, but I'll say within the boundaries of Buddhist or Christian or Muslim. Of course, I have to include everybody, because that's just right,
Family and friends.
right, exactly. But it is to say that it also transcends those lines. Spirituality transcends those lines, just like how you were talking about. You took pieces from Kabbalah, or thread lines through Kabbalah and through Zen, that all of which have influenced your practice currently, but that you retroactively and proactively said, these are my stages on
Mhm, mhm.
my on towards my performance, on my path. These are the landing blocks, that I have experienced and that will continue to experience, but that you are aware of them as part of that, fodder for that fire. You know what I'm saying? And for me, the spiritual life is not related or unrelated to anything. It's actually all encompassing. But it's, again, and this is how we're tantric practitioners, because it is not what you do, but how you do it. And so, in the process of living a life that has a desire to be more connected, then you look at everything as a means of connection, and thereby try and infuse that into yourself and yourself into that. And the ways in which you do it are going to vary based on your own, particular religious or cultural background, and your experience, as in our case. But ultimately, you're trying to do the same thing, right? Which is, I guess, mm, leave the confines of the small identified self as a name and a being and an address at this particular time, and merge with the, capital I or capital S, soul, if you will. You know what I'm saying? Does that
Mhm,
vibe? Does
mhm.
that make sense? And so this is the idea for me. This is the idea of a spiritual life, and it is far more uh, transcendent and encompassing than I think people believe it to be. Because I think it's just kind of like a de facto religion that just doesn't have any dogma associated, but they believe in something else. But I don't know how deeply people actually ask themselves that question. What is a spiritual life? Like, you don't believe in religion, but you believe in something else that exists, so therefore you're spiritual. But it is, they call this a diagnosis of exclusion in medicine, right? They can't figure it out, so they go, okay, it's idiopathic. But
Yeah.
that's not really a diagnosis. That's just a diagnosis of exclusion. And so for me, spirituality is a diagnosis of exclusion when someone believes in something larger than just the mundane life, but doesn't have a label for it. And what I'm saying, and what I'm, would like to hear what you think on it, is like, isn't that just like scratching the surface of, or like cooking your bologna on the hood of a Lamborghini when it's hot? Like you can,
Like you have something super awesome and you're not using it. Is that the
yes,
idea? Okay.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
Does that vibe? Does that jive?
Yeah, this is an interesting episode because you're I wasn't thinking about these things coming in, and now you're asking these like thought-provoking questions.
Yeah,
And I'm trying to be honest about this. I'll try to answer it as best I can in my own way. Okay. So when I think about this for myself, I go, something happened to me late in my early 20s where I got really interested in Zen. And I got lucky in Chicago that I was able to study Zen at the place called the Japanese Cultural Center, which is just in some random neighborhood in Chicago, where I got ended up studying with these Zen masters. I'm going somewhere with this,
yeah, yeah.
trying to share it in a personal way. So what happened then was I got lucky in that the Zen school I studied in was very flexible,
Mm,
right? So it was a Zen master Hakuin, but he also had like a Taoist teacher in Japan. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is non-dominational, non-denominational. It's Unitarian, right? Isn't that what
there
they
you
we
go. Yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
say?
yeah.
Unitarian.
Yes.
So I got like, okay, that's cool. And then, in terms of like building a spiritual life, I really thought like, well, should I go off and try to become some Zen monk in Japan? We talked about that in different episodes.
Yeah, totally.
Or do I have to become like a very like rigid focused person just on this Zen thing. I mean, I had those questions,
Mm.
but I got kind of lucky there too, because the founder of this particular Zen school, coming from this Hakuin guy who had this Taoist teacher, was already kind of flexible,
Yeah.
right? But he was a university president. He was a Zen master. He was a martial arts swords master. He was a great artist and calligrapher. And I thought, yes, it's a round and full life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the way it was framed for me, and we've talked about this at different times along these conversations over the years, but the way it kind of got to me was like all of these things could be pieced together to build an overall momentum of who you are,
Mm.
right? And you could kind of pull from the riches of like, you do the artistic stuff, and that creates more sensitivity and expression. You do the martial arts stuff, and that gives you more power and will and perseverance and
Mhm.
so on, right?
Mhm.
Meditation gives you clarity and insight and wisdom and so on. And so it all kind of built together. I got interested in like even sexuality practices back then, and that was like to learn how to use passion and to learn how to use those sexual feelings for spirituality. So I guess it got big, if this partially answers the question, and I could put those different pieces together. And in terms of the Lamborghini versus the piece of bologna,
Ha, ha,
I
ha.
guess it was the idea that like I'm taking the I'm taking all of the best parts from the different autos.
Yeah.
Here's a little bit from a Lamborghini, here's a little bit from a Maserati or whatever the hell it's supposed to
Sure.
be,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. And I realized like, okay, that's building a complete life. Now, I felt like I had the permission to do that because Hakuin did it. And all these great teachers did this. As far as the Dalai Lama school, Tsongkhapa, I loved these kinds of people. He traveled all over Tibet and he got everything that was available, you
Yeah.
know. So there was a
Yeah.
flexibility in that I found inspiring.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be dogmatic, which I think is a lot of what people like are backing off on the religious question. They don't want to be
Yeah.
around things that are dogmatic,
Correct.
you know.
Correct.
And so I was like, this isn't I got lucky in the sense that these weren't dogmatic things,
Yeah.
and that allowed me to be able to put together what I thought was meaningful. I mean, the goal in the end, I think, again, I'm thinking about Galak Rinpoche a lot because I just did a retreat and he was on my mind, during the retreat that we were just doing over the holiday break. Recording this early January, and I was on retreat after Christmas and like until just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, he gave me kind of like a through line through again to use that image. He gave me a place to hang those things
Yeah.
and kind of like an idea of what enlightenment entailed. We'll talk about that in our retreat. We talk about that in our episodes, trying to explain it, how that's thought about in like the Vajrayana and especially the kind that Gelek Rinpoche was sharing. It goes back to the school of the Dalai Lamas, tantric practice, tantric Buddhist practice. So I got that as kind of the goal, but I also got the idea that there's a flexibility within that, you
Hmm.
know. So, anyways, does that answer some of the question? Hopefully, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I
And
think
maybe
so.
it gives the freedom to like construct your own Maserati or construct your own Lamborghini. You
Yeah.
can like eat the bologna,
Right. Right.
you know, okay, or just toss the bologna aside, get something better once you drive the car over to a better
Right.
place than the bologna place.
Right. Once you drive it to Walgreens, you
Yeah,
can.
just take it through the drive-through somewhere. You get something a little bit better than the bologna.
Right.
And but there was a way of like seeing, okay, yeah, all of this stuff can fuse together, and in
Yeah.
that sense, and there's no doubt I can go through and I can specifically say, oh yeah, I studied Kabbalah pretty seriously. I was studying with like, Kabbalistic rabbis, and I was trying to really learn it. I was reading, in a very immersive way, these great Kabbalistic texts. As far as our episodes go, we haven't even touched that subject, actually. It's still amazing. We haven't scratched anything of that, but we will at some point,
Hmm.
right? And so I can specifically say, oh, I learned that over there or that over there. I learned
Yeah.
things from Master Shenli Wang, my Chinese medical Taoist teacher,
Yeah.
things he taught me. And I was thinking about that over the retreat too. I can get like where I got some of these things that ultimately built together. So maybe that's what we're pitching to in a way. Maybe pitching is the wrong word, but presenting,
Yeah.
sharing this idea like, yeah, you can have that, you can have a serious spiritual life, but that also can have that flexibility to it. And you can take the pieces, that you find moving and, build something for yourself.
And I think the other part is that like, leading a spiritual life for us is one that includes a practice. So, yes, taking all the things in and weaving them into your life is a practice, but what I'm meaning more is a practice of conscious cultivation, of whatever, right? I want to be inclusive of this because I know there's people who have different backgrounds who are listening, but I feel like this is like, if we were going to have something that could be, really widely shared, this would be one. And asking this question of what is spirituality? Modern day spirituality is definitely inclusive of plant medicines and, healing stones and tarot and numerology and astrology and all of these things, right? But as a kind of its own maybe like open-ended kind of, if you want to call it a religion, right? The people who are deeply practiced in those can have them as a much stronger, a much deeper tool, one that penetrates into the ether much more because they have taken the time in their life to have those things as a practice. So like just because you look at your horoscope doesn't mean that you know much about astrology. There's an
Yeah.
entire system of study behind it, right? Same thing with tarot, same thing with numerology. Like those are, you see the door, but you actually have to go into that classroom and learn that thing in order for it to be really accessible to you. I think part of the issue, and this is a kind of a cultural thing, people's attention spans are so short and they're so stressed out for time doing other things that it's like you take a little bit of this, and I mean a little bit, like you take one page out of this one book and one page out of that book, and then eventually you make your own book, but you're only one page deep in anything in particular. And I feel like this is my critique, and I think some of the external world's critique of kind of spirituality is that it is shallow, you know.
Mm.
But actually, on one hand, I agree with some of those sentiments, but I think that's because people have yet to really like dive into a particular thing, maybe because they haven't been called to yet, but they have yet to really dive into something and really go beyond the introductory level teachings and finding the deeper gems that come through alchemization via that lens that they're kind of looking at. Does that vibe?
Yeah. Not again to use the word pitch, not again to pitch our little retreat, but that is a goal for me in that
Exactly. You're damn
to
right.
be able to go through and say, hey, well, we can give you like something that has, I keep making this gesture,
Yes, yes.
but it's like it has a path to it,
Yeah, for those
you
who are just
know?
listening, Eric is milking an invisible cat,
Well, that might be more like that, and that could be almost, who knows? But like spreading out a string or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
That how you'd milk a cat? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't
Sideways
know.
cats.
Yeah, a couple of cats at the same time. We're having a threesome with the cats. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like one of these things where I again, I think um, these things I got interested in had like deep theory behind them,
Sure.
you know? And then by the time I think I got to studying with, again, Gelek Rinpoche, again, he's on my mind. But, there was a way in which I could unite this all together in
Yeah.
this sort of idea of how one could try to pursue enlightenment, which I
Yeah.
suppose is my goal.
Yeah.
You know, I have less problem with the word spirituality, though I understand the critique or the points you're trying to make.
Yeah.
It can be sort of like a vague word that doesn't really mean that much in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you say, I like checking my horoscope every once in a while. I pull a tarot card. I'm spiritual,
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. And we had at one point on one of our, we've had on different guests, and we've had conversations about what does this word spirituality mean.
Yeah.
I kind of like the fact that it's kind of vague because it gives enough space for us to include all the different things that
Sure. Yeah.
might be interests and passions.
Yeah.
But I get what you mean, and like I, it's always been important to me not to feel like I'm being a dilettante too. Like
Correct.
I'm just like if you use the metaphor, it'd be like you're not even taking the whole piece of bologna. You're just taking like a little bit of some corner.
Right.
There's a little meat, a little fatty thing, some of that weird shit that comes as the crusty part on the
That's right.
outside. You're not
Yeah.
even getting the whole slice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get what you mean by that. And I think you were talking a little bit earlier off mic, like that word pops up a lot on like social media now. I'm a spiritual person. I'm a spiritual
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
And you get the intention of what people are trying to do. They're trying to voice something about themselves and the belief in, something more to life, whatever that means for them,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
it is fair to say, like I know people who say that kind of thing, but it doesn't really go anywhere, if you're honest about it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's fine. Maybe the person doesn't want to go anywhere with that anyways, and that's
Right.
cool.
Yeah.
It's a free life. But,
Yeah.
as far as it goes, if you want something to go someplace,
That's right.
you can maybe still use this term, but it has to mean something different for you, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Uh,
Well, that was good.
that constitutes an episode.
That's right. That technically does.
All
Yeah.
right, cool.
Awesome. Well,
So,
that was good. Yeah. And we'll
all
we'll
right.
pick up next time with the attachment stuff. It's just that I saw that on the notes here, and I didn't want to I didn't want to gloss
No,
over.
no, I think it's a hell of a question. So, as far as a preview for next episode, we'll continue with it. And I think it's also, we'll look at how attachment is talked about in, you know, Tibetan Buddhist culture, right?
Yep.
The tantric culture, the non-tantric culture,
Yep.
and maybe with like trying to answer this question, how do like Western people feel about attachment? I'm not
Yeah.
sure. It's an interesting one for me. The thing that you were focusing on, what do people mean by spirituality? That's a hell of a question. And then what do people think about attachment and what does it mean to them? I'm debating that for myself,
Yeah. Yeah.
not in my own life, but like looking around at the people around me going, what does that mean to them? So to
Yeah.
be continued.
For
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
All right. Cool.
Well, audience, thank you for rocking with us. I know we've been hawking our retreat to you guys, but it's available. And but other than that, please like, comment, subscribe wherever you're at, however you're listening to us. If this is your first or second or third or 50th episode, thank you for tuning in. We do appreciate the love and support. Hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com, the Gin and Tantra podcast on Instagram. And yeah, share our work. We appreciate all the love and everything over the years, and we are going to continue to do our thing until time immemorial. Eric, as always, thank you, my friend, for riding the ship with me, brother. And we'll catch everybody in the next one. Peace.